this war began as one thing and became something very different. We have this vision of this war as just being one thing, not about slavery, hard on civilians, not hard. It was all those things at various times. What happened in Fredericksburg was not policy of the Union Army. This is an anomaly that occurs, but it does reflect vividly the increasing bitterness of this war and the willingness to witness and suffer destruction to beings and things that were outside the Army itself. And we, of course, will see that trend accelerate. So this is a kind of a touchstone moment in the evolution of this war. I'll read you one last quote here and then a little footnote before we leave. A man who lived right across the street here in the house that stood right on this corner wrote of a passage through town after all of this. He said, "I write you in bad spirits. Yesterday my family and I rode to Fredericksburg for the purpose of remaining, but the filthy, dilapidated, uninhabitable condition of our house made it absolutely necessary we should again return away, or go away. It is a melancholy sight to see the destruction of property. Many of the houses cannot again be inhabited. Only one or two houses escaped the bombardment and plundering by the barbarians. I met in the street Mr. Tom. Mr. Tom lived in the building that was on this site before, who told me he was utterly ruined. I can assure you I felt deep sympathy for him. He is not alone. Many are in the same condition." Now, before we leave here, just a kind of a historical footnote. Of course, the great byproduct of the Civil War was freedom. The great struggle in the 100 years after was equality. And you're standing, as we look at this corner, we're standing next to a building that in 1960 was the People's Drug Store. We're standing across from a building that in 1960 was W.T. Grant's, and on the far corner was Woolworth's. It was in these three buildings that the youth of Fredericksburg undertook the sit-ins to desegregate the lunch counters and begin the process of desegregation in Fredericksburg. And what makes this story remarkable here in this town, unlike Greensboro, unlike Nashville, other places where these sit-ins were happening in the summer of 1960, Fredericksburg had no college with African-American students. And these sit-ins were executed entirely by high school students who traveled, often took the bus into town or were carried into town, came here on a regular schedule, cycled through these places, and within 30 days, Grant's and Woolworth's, the lunch counters were desegregated. People's was much more militant about it. They refused to go. But it wouldn't be until 1965 that some of the facilities, some of the businesses in Fredericksburg were finally desegregated. These were all three done by the end of that year, done by the high school kids of Fredericksburg, which is a pretty remarkable story in itself.